If You Give a Mouse a Cookie is a children's book written by Laura Numeroff and illustrated by Felicia Bond, first published in 1985. It's used to teach children about circle stories. Orpheus and Eurydice is an ancient Greek myth. It concerns itself with the fateful love of Orpheus of Thrace, son of the god Apollo, and the muse Calliope, for the beautiful Eurydice. Hadestown is the musical retelling of the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice set to a jazz musical score and winner of Best Musical at the 2019 Tonys. Spoilers for all of the above.
And all I've got to offer is sensitivity, intelligence, and charm.
A circle story, or a circular narrative, is a story that ends in the same place it began. You probably first learned about circle stories in kindergarten or first grade when your teacher pulled out one of these. The most popular of these is probably the original If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. In the story, the narrator warns that if you give a mouse a cookie, this mouse will become very greedy, and his demands will become more and more egregious with each turn of the page. At the end of the story, the mouse remembers that he is thirsty, requests a glass of milk, and then requests a cookie to go along with said glass of milk, returning the story back to where it began, giving the mouse a cookie. The myth of Orpheus and Eurydice is not a circle story. In the story, Apollo gifts his son Orpheus a lyre and teaches him how to play. Orpheus is very good at playing the lyre, probably because his mother Calliope is a muse. He falls in love with the beautiful Eurydice. They get married and live happily ever after. The end. Except this is a Greek myth, so obviously it can't be that simple. Months after their marriage, Eurydice is either out dancing with nymphs or is running away from a shepherd who won't take no for an answer, depending on the version of the myth that you read. But regardless of which version you read, she is then bitten by a snake and dies. Orpheus expresses his grief in music, like a true artiste. His song is so mournful that it moves the entire world, and soon both gods and man alike are privy to his real sad boy hours. Orpheus then decides to take a trip down to Hades to visit his deceased wife, playing his lyre along the way to get past the various obstacles on the road to Hades. Very pretentious, I know. He also uses his lyre to attract the attention of the king himself, the king of Hades. Hades promises Orpheus that he can take Eurydice back to the mortal realm with him under one condition. Eurydice must walk behind Orpheus for the entire trip, and Orpheus is not permitted to look back at her. All is well for most of the trip until Orpheus realizes that he cannot hear his wife's footsteps behind him, and he begins to fear that she's not actually behind, and he has been tricked by the gods, as they are prone to do. As it turns out, she is behind him, but in the form of a shade, which is like a ghost, hence the lack of footsteps. Orpheus ultimately caves and looks behind him mere moments from reaching the finish line, and the shade is pulled back into the land of the dead and is trapped in Hades forever. Devastated by this, Orpheus plays a song of mourning. He asks for death so that he can once again see the love of his life, Eurydice. The world listens. He is either killed by beasts who tear him apart, or killed by the Maenads, which I'm saying wrong, or he is struck down by Zeus with a bolt of lightning, depending on the version of the myth. Either way, by the end of the story, both Orpheus and Eurydice are dead. And that's that. At this point, you're probably wondering what this has to do with a children's book that's about giving a mouse a cookie. That's where Hadestown comes in. Hadestown is a folk opera written by Aeneas Mitchell that retells the myth that I just spent a whole minute recounting. It differs from its source material in a few key ways. Eurydice has a little bit more of a personality and a little bit more agency. Persephone plays a much greater role, as does her relationship with Hades. Apollo is written out entirely. The marriage between Orpheus and Eurydice is not perfect, and the stakes are a little bit higher. They concern more of like the world rather than just Orpheus' emo, sad mood because his wife's dead. And most importantly for this video, it becomes a circle story. In our opening number, our Apollo replacement, Hermes, sings this. It's an old song. It's an old tale from way back when. It's an old song, but we're gonna sing it again. This is our first clue that the story is going to repeat itself. We are going to sing it again. At the top of the show, Orpheus is working at this bar, diner, pub thing when Eurydice comes running in and asks anyone if they have a match. The two meet and fall in love, blah, 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 blah. Stuff happens in between that isn't important for this video, but I can't recommend the cast recording enough. And if you have the means to go to New York and go and actually see this show, I highly recommend it. I cried like a baby. But the show appears to end in very much the same way that the original myth does. Eurydice follows behind Orpheus, but then mere inches from freedom, he turns around and she gets dragged back into what is essentially hell. And she is gone forever. This we know. But then something happens that isn't a part of the original myth. Instead of our boy Orphe calling to the gods for death and receiving that wish, Hermes cuts in and sings this. It's a sad song. It's a sad tale. It's a tragedy. It's a sad song, but we sing it anyway. 'Cause here's the thing. To know how it ends and still begin to sing it again, as if it might turn out this time, I learned that from a friend of mine. Eurydice then runs onto the stage asking if anybody has a match, and the story begins all over again. Circle stories, even ones about giving mice cookies, give us the opportunity to try again and again and again. The story of Orpheus and Eurydice is a tragedy in every sense of the word. Hadestown, however, is not. And the reason it's not is that opportunity to try again. Hadestown comes with it a sense of hope. And that sense of hope comes from the circle. Life is full of tragedy, but as long as we sing it again and again and again, there is always hope that it will turn out this time. To me, that's what Hadestown is really about. In the song, Livin' It Up on Top, Orpheus gives a toast, which goes, "To the world we dream about, and the one we live in now." A motif that repeats multiple times during the musical goes, Orpheus was a poor boy, but he had a gift to give. He can make you see how the world could be, in spite of the way that it is. In fact, the slogan for the entire show is, "Come see how the world could be." When you were about 6 or 7, you were introduced to circular narratives with the book If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. When it was first read to me, I was incredibly frustrated by its structure. This poor boy in this book gets dragged around by this mouse for about 19 pages, only to have to start all over again. How annoying is that? What I didn't see was the chance to change the story with each try to appease this horrible rodent. Humans don't give up easily, because it might work out this time, and we might get to see how the world could be. Also, shout out to Trombone Guy.